In a quiet kingdom surrounded by lush green hills and thick forests, life had always been simple and joyful. The people lived happily under the leadership of King Aldrich, a wise and kind ruler who cared deeply for his people. Every morning, farmers would tend to their fields, children played in the streets, and merchants called out to passers-by, selling fresh bread and colorful fabrics. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names, and laughter echoed through the air. But lately, something strange had begun to disturb the peace. At first, it was small things: farm animals going missing, crops wilting overnight, and an unsettling silence falling over the woods. People shrugged it off as bad luck or blamed wandering predators. However, as days turned into weeks, the incidents grew worse. Entire herds of sheep vanished without a trace, leaving behind only torn scraps of wool scattered across the ground. Villagers reported hearing eerie howls at night, so loud they could be heard even inside locked homes. Some claimed to have seen shadowy figures lurking near the edges of town, watching silently before disappearing into the darkness. Fear began to creep into the hearts of the people. No one dared venture too far from home after sunset, and parents kept their children close. Whispers of an ancient curse started spreading like wildfire. Old tales told of a dark force that once terrorized the land centuries ago, a demon said to bring ruin wherever it went. Though no one alive today had seen such horrors, the stories felt all too real now. Many believed the curse had returned, awakened by some unknown event. King Aldrich, troubled by these reports, summoned Sir Cedric, the head of the king's guard. Cedric was known throughout the kingdom for his bravery and loyalty. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a sword always at his side, he inspired confidence in everyone around him. Yet even Cedric couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled in his chest when he heard the king's concerns. "Something isn't right," Aldrich said gravely. "I need you to find out what's causing this chaos." Determined to protect his people, Cedric set out on horseback the very next day. He traveled to the villages most affected, speaking to farmers, blacksmiths, and innkeepers. Each story was more alarming than the last. One elderly woman tearfully recounted finding claw marks on her barn door, too large to belong to any animal she'd ever seen. A young boy described seeing glowing red eyes staring at him from the forest edge, before vanishing into thin air. The pieces didn't add up. It wasn't just thieves or wild beasts causing this destruction. Something far darker was at play. As Cedric rode deeper into the countryside, he noticed the landscape itself seemed different. The trees stood unnaturally still, as if holding their breath. Birds no longer sang, and the usual rustle of wildlife was absent. Even the wind felt colder, carrying with it a faint metallic smell. His instincts told him he was getting closer to the source of the trouble. But little did he know, the answers lay hidden in a place few dared to enter. A mysterious cave deep within the heart of the forest. What awaited him there would change everything, not just for Cedric, but for the entire kingdom. Sir Cedric's search led him deeper into the forest than he had ever ventured before. The sunlight barely pierced through the thick canopy of trees, casting long shadows on the forest floor. Every step his horse took seemed to echo louder than the last, as if the woods themselves were listening. The air grew colder with each passing moment, and an eerie stillness surrounded him. It was unlike anything Cedric had experienced in his years as a knight. Even the birds, usually chirping cheerfully, were nowhere to be heard. After hours of riding, Cedric finally stumbled upon something that sent a chill down his spine: a narrow path leading to the mouth of a cave. The entrance was partially hidden by overgrown vines and moss, as though nature itself wanted to keep it concealed. But what caught Cedric's attention were the faint, glowing symbols etched into the rocky walls around the opening. They pulsed softly, almost like a heartbeat, casting an otherworldly light that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. He dismounted his horse and cautiously approached the cave, his hand resting firmly on the hilt of his sword. Inside, the air was damp and heavy, carrying a strange metallic tang that made his throat feel dry. The glowing symbols continued along the walls, illuminating the way forward. As Cedric ventured deeper, he noticed they formed intricate patterns, circles within circles, lines intersecting at odd angles, and shapes that seemed to shift when he looked away. He couldn't read them, but their presence felt deliberate, as if they held some ancient meaning. The further he went, the stronger the feeling of unease became, as though the cave itself was alive and watching him. At the center of the cavern, Cedric discovered something that stopped him in his tracks, an obsidian stone suspended midair, encased in rusted iron chains. The stone was jagged and black, its surface reflecting no light, not even the faint glow of the symbols around it. It looked unnatural, as if it didn't belong in this world. Cedric felt an inexplicable pull toward it, a mix of curiosity and dread. He reached out instinctively but quickly pulled his hand back when a sudden wave of cold shot up his arm. Something about the stone felt wrong, dangerous. Before he could examine it further, his eyes fell on the ground around the stone. Deep claw marks scarred the rocky floor, far too large to belong to any known creature. Whatever had been here was enormous and powerful. Cedric knelt to inspect them more closely, running his fingers over the grooves. They were fresh. His heart raced as he realized he wasn't alone in the cave. A low, guttural growl echoed from somewhere deeper inside, reverberating through the cavern and sending a shiver down his spine. Cedric's instincts screamed at him to leave, but he forced himself to stay calm. He needed to gather as much information as possible before reporting back to the king. Quickly scanning the area, he spotted fragments of parchment scattered near the stone. They were old and brittle, covered in faded ink that matched the glowing symbols on the walls. Though he couldn't decipher the writing, he carefully tucked the pieces into his satchel, hoping someone wiser could make sense of them later. As the growling grew louder, Cedric knew he had pushed his luck far enough. He backed out of the cave slowly, keeping his sword drawn and his senses sharp. Once outside, he mounted his horse and spurred it into a gallop, not stopping until he reached the edge of the forest. Only then did he allow himself to breathe deeply, his mind racing with questions. What was the stone? Who, or what, had left those claw marks? And most importantly, what kind of threat was lurking in the shadows of the kingdom? The answers weighed heavily on his shoulders, but one thing was certain. The peaceful days of the kingdom were over. Whatever force was behind these events was growing stronger, and time was running out. Cedric knew he had to act fast and wisely if he hoped to protect the people he swore to serve. Sir Cedric wasted no time in returning to the castle. The moment he dismounted his horse, his face was etched with urgency. He strode through the grand halls of the palace, his boots echoing against the stone floors, until he reached the throne room. King Aldrich sat upon his golden throne, flanked by his council of advisors, wise men and women who had guided the kingdom for years. Their expressions shifted from curiosity to concern as Cedric recounted what he had discovered in the forest. He began with the glowing symbols, describing how they pulsed like living things and seemed to guide him toward the cave. Then came the obsidian stone, suspended unnaturally in the air, its presence both mesmerizing and terrifying. When he mentioned the claw marks and the guttural growl echoing from deeper within the cavern, a hush fell over the room. Even the king leaned forward, his brow furrowed with worry. "This is no ordinary threat," Cedric said firmly. "Whatever it is, it's growing bolder and closer." The council erupted into heated discussion. Some argued that the cave should be sealed off immediately, blocking access to whatever lurked inside. Others insisted on gathering more soldiers to investigate further. But one elderly scholar, Brother Alaric, remained silent throughout the debate. His eyes were closed, his hands clasped tightly together as if deep in thought. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but heavy with gravity. "I fear this may be tied to an ancient prophecy," he said. All eyes turned to him. Brother Alaric rose slowly, leaning on his wooden staff for support. He explained that centuries ago, A powerful demon had been sealed away by the kingdom's ancestors after it brought ruin to the land. According to legend, the demon was imprisoned using an artifact, a black stone bound by enchanted chains. If the stone were disturbed or broken free, the prophecy warned of chaos and despair descending upon the realm once more. The signs you describe, the glowing symbols, the unnatural stone, the claw marks, they matched the warnings of old texts, Alaric concluded. A tense silence filled the room. The weight of the revelation pressed down on everyone present. Sir Cedric clenched his fists, feeling the enormity of the situation settle on his shoulders. This wasn't just about protecting villages or hunting down predators anymore. They were dealing with something far beyond their understanding. "We can't face this alone," he said finally, breaking the quiet. "We need help from those who know more about these kinds of threats than we do." King Aldrich nodded solemnly. Though reluctant to involve outsiders, he knew Cedric was right. They couldn't risk underestimating the danger. With a heavy heart, the king gave the order. Press the emergency buzzer. It was a signal rarely used, reserved only for the direst emergencies when the kingdom itself was at stake. The buzzer would summon aid from neighboring realms, warriors, scholars, and mystics skilled in combating supernatural forces. As servants hurried to activate the signal, the council dispersed to prepare for the arrival of allies. Sir Cedric stayed behind, speaking privately with the king. "Your Majesty," he began, his tone resolute, "I'll take full responsibility for leading this fight. Whatever comes next, I swear to protect our people, even if it costs me everything." Aldrich placed a reassuring hand on Cedric's shoulder. "You've always been a true guardian of this kingdom," he replied. "But remember, you won't be fighting alone. We'll stand together, as we must." Outside, the emergency buzzer rang out across the hills, its sound carrying far beyond the borders of the kingdom. It was a call for help, a plea for unity in the face of unimaginable darkness. As the echoes faded, the castle buzzed with activity. Preparations began in earnest, from fortifying defenses to gathering supplies. Yet beneath the surface, an unspoken fear lingered. The enemy they faced was unlike anything they'd encountered before, and failure was not an option. For now, all they could do was wait, and hope that the allies who answered the call would bring the strength and knowledge needed to turn the tide. The emergency buzzer's call did not go unanswered. Within days, representatives from neighboring realms began arriving at the castle gates, each bringing their own unique skills and expertise. The first to arrive was Lady Seraphina, a striking sorceress known for her mastery of ancient magic. Her flowing robes shimmered with intricate patterns that seemed to shift when she moved, and her piercing blue eyes held an air of wisdom far beyond her years. She carried a staff topped with a glowing crystal, which hummed softly as if alive. Though polite, she kept mostly to herself, studying the fragments of parchment Cedric had brought back from the cave. Next came Thorn, a grizzled mercenary with a reputation for surviving battles others wouldn't dare enter. His armor was scarred from countless fights, and his broadsword rested easily at his side. Unlike Lady Seraphina, Thorn was loud and brash, often cracking jokes to lighten the mood. But there was no mistaking the sharp intelligence behind his rough exterior. He wasted no time inspecting the kingdom's defenses, offering blunt but practical advice on how to prepare for whatever might come next. The final arrival was Brother Alaric himself, who had volunteered to join the group despite his advanced age. Accompanying him was a young apprentice monk named Elias, tasked with assisting the elder in deciphering the prophecy tied to the obsidian stone. Together, they set up a small library of scrolls and books in one of the castle's chambers, poring over dusty tomes late into the night. Their work was meticulous, piecing together clues about the demon's origins and weaknesses. At first, tensions ran high among the newly formed team. Sir Cedric, though respected as the leader of the king's guard, struggled to earn the trust of the outsiders. Lady Seraphina viewed him as overly cautious, while Thorn dismissed his methods as too rigid. Even Brother Alaric's scholarly approach clashed with Cedric's straightforward mindset. Arguments flared during strategy meetings, with each member convinced their way was best. But despite their differences, they shared a common goal: protecting the kingdom from the looming threat. Cedric realized early on that unity would be key to their success. Determined to bridge the gaps between them, he made an effort to understand their perspectives. He spent hours speaking with Lady Seraphina, learning about the intricacies of magical wards and protective spells. With Thorn, he sparred in the training yard, earning the mercenaries' respect through sheer determination and skill. And with Brother Alaric, he listened patiently as the monk explained the deeper meanings behind the symbols found in the cave. Slowly but surely, the group began to function as a cohesive unit. Lady Seraphina taught everyone basic defensive enchantments, ensuring even those without magical abilities could protect themselves. Thorn organized combat drills, emphasizing teamwork and adaptability in battle. Meanwhile, Brother Alaric worked tirelessly to translate the prophecy, uncovering vital information about the ritual needed to reseal the demon. The young apprentice, Elias, proved surprisingly resourceful, using his knowledge of herbs to create salves that healed wounds faster. As the days passed, reports of attacks grew more frequent and closer to the capital. Entire fields were razed overnight, leaving behind scorched earth and twisted crops. Villagers fled to the safety of the castle walls, their faces pale with fear. Each new report served as a grim reminder of what was at stake. Yet amidst the chaos, the unlikely alliance forged within the castle grew stronger. They trained together, planned together, and shared meals around the great hall's long table, exchanging stories of their lives before this mission. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Cedric stood atop the castle battlements, gazing out at the darkening landscape. Lady Seraphina joined him, her staff glowing faintly in the twilight. "Do you think we can win?" she asked quietly, breaking the silence. Cedric hesitated before answering. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I do know this. We have the best chance we're going to get, with all of us working together." Seraphina nodded, a flicker of hope lighting her eyes. For the first time since the crisis began, it felt like they weren't just reacting to events, they were preparing to take control. Whatever awaited them in the depths of the cursed cave, they would face it as one. And perhaps, just perhaps, that unity would be enough to tip the scales in their favor. The journey back to the cursed cave was anything but easy. Armed with weapons, enchanted amulets, and newfound resolve, the group set out at dawn, their path illuminated by the pale light of the rising sun. Sir Cedric led the way, his armor glinting faintly as he marched ahead with determination. Lady Seraphina followed close behind, her staff glowing softly, casting an ethereal light that kept the shadows at bay. Thorn brought up the rear, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, his sharp eyes scanning the trees for any sign of movement. Brother Alaric and Elias walked in the middle, clutching scrolls and holy relics, their expressions a mix of focus and quiet apprehension. As they approached the forest, the air grew colder and the cheerful sounds of birdsong faded into an unsettling silence. The trees seemed taller, their gnarled branches twisting like skeletal fingers reaching out to block the path. Even the ground beneath their feet felt different, softer, as if it might swallow them whole. Every step forward felt heavier, as though the forest itself resisted their presence. Yet no one spoke of turning back. They had come too far, and the stakes were too high. When they finally reached the cave, the glowing symbols on its walls pulsed brighter than before, almost as if they sensed the group's arrival. Cedric paused at the entrance, taking a deep breath to steady himself. "Stay alert," he warned, his voice firm but calm. "We don't know what's waiting for us inside." With that, they stepped into the cavern, the dim light from Seraphina's staff guiding their way. The air was thick and suffocating, carrying the same metallic tang Cedric had noticed during his first visit. The obsidian stone loomed ahead, suspended in the center of the chamber, its dark surface absorbing all light around it. Before they could examine the stone further, the ground trembled violently, and a low growl echoed through the cavern. From the shadows emerged the source of their terror, a monstrous creature unlike anything they had ever seen. Its body was a grotesque fusion of scales, fur, and jagged bone, with glowing red eyes that burned with malice. Razor-sharp claws scraped against the rocky floor as it moved, its massive form blocking the exit. The demon let out a deafening roar, shaking the very walls of the cave. "Stand your ground," Cedric shouted, drawing his sword. The battle erupted instantly. Thorn charged forward, his blade clashing against the demon's claws with a shower of sparks. Lady Seraphina raised her staff, chanting incantations that sent waves of fiery energy crashing into the beast. Brother Alaric and Elias worked together, reciting prayers and scattering blessed herbs to weaken the creature's power. Despite their combined efforts, the demon proved relentless, its strength unmatched and its movements unnaturally fast. Cedric fought valiantly, dodging swipes from the demon's claws and striking whenever he saw an opening. But the creature was cunning, lashing out unpredictably and forcing the group to constantly adapt. At one point, Thorn was knocked backward, his armor dented from the impact. Seraphina stumbled as her spell faltered, exhaustion beginning to show on her face. Even Brother Alaric's chants grew weaker, his voice strained from the effort. Just when it seemed they might be overwhelmed, Elias stepped forward, clutching a vial of shimmering liquid. "This might work," he cried, throwing the contents onto the demon. The liquid sizzled upon contact, causing the creature to shriek in pain and stagger back. Seizing the moment, Cedric rallied the group. "Now, hit it together," he commanded. Thorn swung his sword with all his might. Seraphina unleashed a final burst of magic, and Alaric finished the prayer, raising his hands as a blinding light enveloped the cavern. The demon roared one last time before collapsing, its massive body dissolving into ash. For a brief moment, there was silence. The group stood panting, their bodies battered but alive. Though victorious, they knew this was only the beginning. The obsidian stone still floated ominously in the center of the chamber, its dark energy pulsing stronger than ever. Whatever force they had just defeated was merely a fragment of the greater threat awaiting them. And now, they had to confront the true heart of the darkness, the artifact itself. As the dust settled, and the demon's remains faded into nothingness, the group gathered around the obsidian stone, their exhaustion giving way to a mix of awe and dread. The artifact pulsed with an ominous energy, its surface rippling like liquid despite being solid. It was clear that defeating the creature had only been a temporary victory. The true source of the threat remained untouched. Brother Alaric stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly as he opened the ancient scroll they had brought with them. "This is it," he said gravely, "the ritual to reseal the demon." Lady Seraphina knelt beside him, her sharp eyes scanning the text. "It says here that the stone must be bound again, using a combination of magic, faith, and sacrifice," she explained, her voice steady but tinged with unease. "But there's more." She hesitated, glancing at Cedric before continuing. "One person will have to channel the stone's power directly. They'll act as the anchor, binding themselves to it forever." The weight of her words hung in the air. Everyone exchanged uneasy glances, the reality of the situation sinking in. "What happens to the person who does this?" Thorn asked, breaking the silence. His usual bravado was gone, replaced by a rare seriousness. "They become part of the seal," Alaric replied softly. "Their life force will merge with the stone, ensuring the demon cannot escape again. But they won't survive the process." A heavy silence fell over the group. Each member wrestled with their thoughts, knowing what had to be done but dreading the cost. Lady Seraphina spoke first, her voice firm. "I should do it. My magic makes me the most suited for this task." She met Cedric's gaze, daring him to argue. But before anyone could respond, Thorn stepped forward, shaking his head. "No," he said gruffly. "You're too valuable. Your spells kept us alive out there. I'm stronger. I can handle whatever this thing throws at me." He crossed his arms, his stance unyielding. Brother Alaric sighed deeply, leaning heavily on his staff. "It is not about strength or skill," he said. "This requires someone willing to give everything without hesitation, someone who understands duty above all else." Cedric listened quietly, his jaw tightening as the debate unfolded. Finally, he stepped forward, his expression resolute. "It has to be me," he declared, his voice cutting through the tension. All eyes turned to him, shock written across their faces. "Cedric, no," Serafina protested immediately. "You're the leader of the King's Guard. You can't." "I'm the only choice," Cedric interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "This is my duty. I swore to protect the kingdom, even if it costs me my life. If I don't do this, who will? Who else can ensure the safety of our people?" Thorn opened his mouth to object, but Cedric raised a hand, silencing him. "We don't have time to argue. The stone's energy is growing stronger. You can feel it. If we wait any longer, the demon might break free completely. This is the only way." For a moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, Alaric nodded. "He's right," the old monk said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "Sir Cedric is the logical and honorable choice. But know this, once the ritual begins, there is no turning back." Reluctantly, the others agreed. Though their hearts ached at the thought of losing Cedric, they knew he was right. Together, they prepared for the final step. Alaric instructed everyone on their roles. Serafina would weave protective barriers to contain the stone's energy. Thorn would guard against any unforeseen threats, and Elias would assist Alaric in chanting the sacred words needed to activate the ritual. As the preparations began, Cedric took a moment to himself. He stood near the edge of the chamber, gazing at the faint light filtering in from the cave's entrance. For the first time, he allowed himself to think about what lay ahead, not with fear, but with acceptance. He thought of King Aldrich, the people of the kingdom, and the oath he had taken so many years ago. This was his purpose, his final act of service. When he rejoined the group, his face was calm, his resolve unwavering. "Let's finish this," he said simply. One by one, the others nodded, their respect for him shining through their sadness. As they took their positions, Cedric stepped toward the obsidian stone, ready to make the ultimate sacrifice, for the kingdom, for his king, and for the future of everyone he loved. The chamber fell silent as the ritual began, the air thick with tension and the oppressive energy of the obsidian stone. Lady Serafina stood at the edge of the circle, her hands glowing faintly as she wove intricate patterns in the air. Her voice rose in a melodic chant, each word resonating like a bell, creating shimmering barriers that surrounded the group. The protective magic crackled softly, forming a dome of light that pushed back against the darkness emanating from the artifact. Thorn positioned himself near the entrance, his sword drawn and his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. Though the demon had been defeated, he knew better than to let his guard down. His presence was a reminder that danger could still strike at any moment, and his readiness brought a small sense of comfort to the others. At the center of it all was Cedric, standing before the obsidian stone with quiet determination. Brother Alaric and Elias knelt nearby, their voices blending in a rhythmic prayer that echoed through the cavern. The ancient words seemed to awaken something within the stone. It began to vibrate violently, its surface swirling like black smoke caught in a storm. A low hum filled the chamber, growing louder and more intense with every passing second. "Stay focused," Alaric called out, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. "We must not break the rhythm." Cedric nodded, steeling himself for what was to come. He reached out slowly, placing his hands on the cold, jagged surface of the stone. The moment his skin touched it, a searing pain shot through his body, as though fire and ice were coursing through his veins simultaneously. He gritted his teeth, refusing to pull away. The stone's energy surged into him, overwhelming his senses and threatening to consume him entirely. Yet, even as the pain intensified, he held firm, channeling every ounce of his strength and willpower to keep going. The ritual reached its peak as Alaric shouted the final incantation, his voice booming with authority. The obsidian stone erupted in a blinding flash of light, forcing everyone to shield their eyes. For a brief moment, the entire cavern was illuminated, revealing cracks spreading across the walls as if the very earth was being torn apart. Then, just as suddenly, the light vanished, leaving behind an eerie stillness. When Cedric opened his eyes, he felt different. The connection between him and the stone was undeniable now, a bond forged in sacrifice and sealed by fate. The once pulsing artifact had grown eerily calm, its dark energy subdued under his control. But the cost was clear. His body trembled with exhaustion, and his breathing came in shallow gasps. He knew deep down that this was the beginning of the end for him. "Cedric," Serafina whispered, her voice trembling. She stepped forward, tears glistening in her eyes, but Cedric raised a hand to stop her. "It's done," he said, his voice weak but steady. "The demon is sealed. The kingdom is safe." Before anyone could respond, the ground beneath them shook violently. Rocks tumbled from the ceiling, and fissures spread across the floor. The cave was collapsing, unable to contain the forces that had been unleashed during the ritual. "Move. Now," Thorn barked, ushering everyone toward the exit. Alaric and Elias scrambled to their feet, clutching their scrolls as they ran. Serafina hesitated, looking back at Cedric, who remained rooted in place. "Go," Cedric commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I'll hold the seal until you're clear. Don't let my sacrifice be in vain." Reluctantly, Serafina obeyed, following the others as they fled the crumbling cavern. Cedric stayed behind, using the last of his strength to reinforce the barrier around the stone. As the rumbling grew louder and the walls caved in around him, he closed his eyes, envisioning the kingdom he had sworn to protect. Peaceful fields, smiling faces, laughter echoing through the streets, all of it worth the price he was paying. The roar of collapsing rock drowned out everything else as the cave sealed itself shut, burying the obsidian stone. And Sir Cedric, forever. Outside, the survivors emerged into the daylight, gasping for breath as they watched the entrance collapse behind them. They stood in silence, the weight of what had just happened settling over them like a heavy blanket. Though victorious, their hearts ached with loss. Cedric's bravery and selflessness had saved them all, but the kingdom would never forget the price he paid to ensure their freedom. The survivors stood at the edge of the forest, their faces pale and streaked with dirt as the dust from the collapsed cave settled in the distance. The once menacing cavern was now nothing more than a pile of rubble, its secrets buried deep beneath layers of rock and earth. Though they had emerged victorious, the weight of Cedric's sacrifice hung heavily over them. Lady Serafina clutched her staff tightly, her knuckles white as she stared at the ruins, while Thorn leaned on his sword, his usual bravado replaced by a somber silence. Brother Alaric and Elias exchanged quiet words, their expressions etched with sorrow. It took several moments before anyone could speak. Finally, Thorn broke the silence, his voice rough but filled with respect. "He gave everything for us, for all of them," he said, gesturing toward the kingdom beyond the hills. "We can't let that be forgotten." Serafina nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. Cedric wasn't just a knight. He was the heart of the king's guard. His courage will live on in every story told about this day. She paused, looking at the others. "But we owe it to him, and to the people, to make sure they understand what he did. He didn't just save the kingdom. He saved hope itself." With heavy hearts, the group made their way back to the castle, where King Aldrich awaited news of their mission. When they arrived, the king immediately noticed Cedric's absence. His face fell as Serafina stepped forward, recounting the events in the cave, the battle against the demon, the ritual, and Cedric's ultimate sacrifice. The room grew silent as the weight of her words sank in. Even the usually stoic king struggled to maintain his composure, his hands trembling as he gripped the arms of his throne. "He died a hero," Serafina concluded softly. "And because of him, the kingdom is safe." King Aldrich rose slowly, his voice thick with emotion. "Sir Cedric's name will never fade from memory. From this day forward, he shall be remembered as the savior of our land, a true guardian who gave his life so others might live." Turning to the gathered crowd of advisors and servants, he declared that a day of mourning would be observed across the kingdom, followed by a grand celebration to honor Cedric's bravery and legacy. In the days that followed, stories of Cedric's heroism spread far and wide. Villagers spoke of how he had faced unimaginable horrors without hesitation, putting himself in harm's way to protect those who could not fight for themselves. Statues were erected in his likeness, standing tall in town squares and along the castle walls. Songs were sung in his honor, tales of his valor passed down from generation to generation. Meanwhile, the obsidian stone was locked away in the deepest vaults of the castle, guarded by powerful enchantments crafted by Lady Serafina herself. Only a select few knew of its location, sworn to secrecy to ensure it would never again pose a threat. The prophecy scrolls and fragments recovered from the cave were carefully preserved, serving as a reminder of the dangers that lurked in the shadows and the sacrifices required to keep them at bay. Life in the kingdom slowly returned to normal, though the scars of the ordeal remained. Farmers tended to their fields once more, children played freely in the streets, and laughter echoed through the air. Yet there was an underlying sense of gratitude, a collective understanding that peace came at a cost, paid by those willing to stand against darkness. As time passed, Sir Cedric's legend only grew stronger. Parents told their children bedtime stories about the brave knight who had faced a demon and won, teaching them the values of courage, duty, and selflessness. And whenever fear or uncertainty crept into the hearts of the people, they found comfort in remembering Cedric's unwavering resolve. Though the kingdom had been saved, the lessons of that fateful day endured. It was a reminder that even in the darkest times, heroes could rise, ordinary individuals capable of extraordinary acts. Sir Cedric had proven that one person's sacrifice could change the course of history, leaving behind a legacy that would inspire generations to come. And so, the kingdom thrived, not because it forgot the past, but because it chose to honor it. For as long as Cedric's story was told, the spirit of the King's Guard lived on, watching over the land and reminding everyone that true strength lies not in power, but in the willingness to protect others, even at the greatest cost.